Well, good morning. After our formal introductions from Maryland, Montgomery County, and Virginia, we're ready to get in with our program now at the 6th Annual BioHealth Capital Region. And we're really excited to have our first keynote presentation today from an individual with an organization that is playing a major role in the ecosystem of the BioHealth Capital Region. We're fortunate to have Sandeep Patel, PhD, who's the Director of Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures, known as DRIVE, at BARDA, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And why BARDA is so important to us is we've had over $7 billion of BARDA funding come in to address COVID-19 and the pandemic in the last 6 months. And 5 out of the top recipients of BARDA Warp Speed funds are located within the BioHealth Capital Region, which also speaks very well about us having the assets, knowledge, and technologies to help come up with some possible solutions with vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics to deal with COVID-19 and the pandemic. But Sandeep is really leading a very interesting division, which is one of the most entrepreneurial and innovative in the federal government with this DRIVE program. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sandeep Patel to talk about investing in the future of health security in America. Sandeep, welcome to the BioHealth Capital Region.
Thanks, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to you and BioHealth Innovation for inviting me and having me join the virtual forum. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sandeep Patel. As of March, about 6 months ago, I started in this role as the Director of the Division of Research, Innovation Ventures, DRIVE at BARDA. We're a 2-year-old organization that's embedded within a 14-year-old organization, BARDA, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For those of you who don't know who we are, what we do, I'll provide some context, but I wanted to first actually start with a scenario. And it's one that I think captures a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the ways that we're thinking about now and in the future, where we need to position ourselves. So this is a problem where, it's one we hear about repeatedly. It's one that we've all experienced in some form, right? So take this healthcare paradigm. You're well until you develop symptoms, right? And then the symptoms develop enough such that it prompts you to seek healthcare. Typically, you go to an ER, urgent care. If you can get an appointment with a primary care physician, you will. And then, hopefully, if you're lucky, you get diagnosed with something, and then you go and seek treatment, and whether you hit a pharmacy or some other place to seek the medication. And so this is the scenario we're all used to. But you may ask, well, what's the issue with this? Well, there's a couple things. So one is that, if you're dealing with an infectious disease, you deal with long wait times on all of these scenarios, right? And you risk both progression of disease yourself, but also transmission risk. And delaying, obviously, diagnosis and treatment, which can be an issue on a number of different fronts. Take the example of seasonal flu, right? This is the sort of the paradigm in which we live. I would describe ourselves as, we're frogs in boiling water, right? We've not only come to accept this as reality, it's really the only reality that we're aware actually exists. And this scenario causes all sorts of issues and has cascading effects. And COVID-19, I think, more than anything, has laid bare, the issues around this and the opportunities exist to break this paradigm. And as you all probably are aware, there's a number of forces at play here, right? So the continued and accelerated transition of the healthcare payment system from fee-for-service to value-based care is starting to break this mentality, this paradigm. The increased focus on primary care prevention is starting to break this. The transition and the change of healthcare delivery models from typically hospital-based to now, retail care to home-based care, and even other settings. And of course, telehealth, which is starting to drive a lot of the changes. These are all forces that are again, rethinking the way we think about this scenario. So I'll just stop there for this and then go back to BARDA, and I'll touch on this again. So BARDA, if you guys aren't familiar, we're a organization, like I said, embedded within HHS. Our goal really is to develop medical countermeasures to prepare for, respond to health emergencies. And these health emergencies can range from, everything from hurricanes to biological, nuclear, radiological, chemical attacks and threats, to emerging infectious diseases, pandemics, COVID-19, and a variety of other scenarios. And what we mean by medical countermeasures is, we think of typically vaccines, therapeutics, other kinds of devices like diagnostic tests, ventilators, and other things like that are kind of the thing that has been the BARDA model. And we have enormous flexibility in the way we operate. We can, our bread and butter is to do public-private partnerships. As Rich mentioned, a lot of the work actually recently has really focused a lot on the capital region for some of the work. But we're really trying to promote innovation and get products developed and commercialized as fast as possible. That's sort of the model. The way BARDA, and we've brought 55 products since our existence to FDA licensure. It's actually 56 now. There was recently an Ebola therapeutic that for the first Ebola therapeutic was approved by the FDA recently. So that brings it to 56, but that's sort of the model up until now. Many of these products, however, are designed for, depend on the traditional healthcare delivery model. And in the case of emergencies, relies on this model that you may or may not be familiar with the stockpile model of, let's develop these emergency use medications and devices and make sure that they're available in times of emergency. And so we've developed the stockpile model. And for a number of reasons, and I think a lot of what's happened this year has made apparent, is that model is not always the most effective. And so thinking about, again, these new healthcare delivery models and how do we leverage what's happening in that space to thinking about health security and the future of it. And really, that's one of the reasons why Drive was created was, especially if you take a step back and look at the health innovation, biohealth innovation ecosystem today, it doesn't look the same as it did a while ago, right? It's not just large biotech pharma companies. There's a whole ecosystem of startups in a variety of spaces that are emerging and converging in all sorts of different ways. And whether you talk about health IT or distributed manufacturing or a number of other trends that are happening, there's a lot going on. And so Drive was really created to help BARDA stay ahead of the game and to try to push BARDA into the future as much as possible. And so we look and try to identify big health security challenges, look for innovators across a wide variety of geographies, of fields, of maturity, and support them and nurture them and essentially help create this pipeline that we can then further invest in to ultimately to commercialize and make available these capabilities for use in emergencies. And we take a very different approach to this. We are not only looking at innovative ways and innovative things to fund, we're also trying to break assumptions of how we operate, how government operates, how we fund entrepreneurs and innovators, and making it as easy, as simple as possible to achieve, what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to step a little bit into some of what we do, but I'm going to go back to that original, the paradigm that I mentioned. And you'll notice that everything that we're doing and everything that we're thinking about are essentially variations on a theme, right? They're variations on that same theme, on different ways to break some of the assumptions that are embedded within them. So the programs that we started within Drive 2 years ago really are ENACT and Solving Sepsis, which are shown here. ENACT stands for Early Notification to Act, Control, and Treat. So the whole idea here is, can we empower patients with information and data earlier than we normally do, so such that they both understand, even potentially pre-symptomatically, a state of disease that they normally would just, be unaware of. that then prompts them to seek the kinds of medical attention that would improve outcomes and catch diseases earlier and things like that. Taking advantage of the wave of wearable technologies, sensing technologies, and data analytical tools that exist now. And so that program, and I'll talk about later some of the effects of that with COVID-19. The second program we have, Solving Sepsis, really recognizes that sepsis is one of these conditions that we often ignore, but is a huge common condition that results from infections and traumas and other scenarios, right? So this is the dysregulation of the immune system, following trauma or infection, can be caused by bacterial viral infections or other scenarios. And we did a bunch of analyses that sort of showed very clearly that there are 1.7 million cases of sepsis in the US every year. There's about 80,000 cases discharged to hospice, 270,000 deaths per year. And based on a Medicare analysis we did, about $60 billion in costs. So this is one of these huge issues where it affects everything that BARDA is interested in. It affects a lot of the healthcare system, but there has not been a concerted focus on addressing and developing advanced technologies to address it. And so we created this program, Solving Sepsis, to really focus on that. And then another program that we just launched recently, really in response to COVID-19, was developing alternatives to traditional syringe and needle technologies. And so when you think about mass immunizations, like we're about to engage in with COVID-19, what's become apparent is that there are supply chain vulnerabilities with developing syringes and needles, and then you go to some of the issues around the fact that 20% of Americans are afraid of needles, that needles restrict the number of care sites that one can administer vaccines, and that if we think really ahead of the game and say, like, can we deliver vaccines in completely new ways, right? It opens up very different types of healthcare delivery models, both for emergencies and outside of emergencies as well. So anyway, so those are three programs. Just diving a little bit into ENACT, really there's three pieces of this. One of these focused on pre-symptomatic diagnosis and information, really looking at can we use things like wearable sensors and smart algorithms layered on top of that to notify someone before they would even think of having like the flu or COVID-19, that they might have it, and to flag for them to seek care earlier than they normally do. Things like systems where we can use smart telehealth platforms to not only identify hotspots of disease, but also, again, flag for people and healthcare providers that there may be patients nearby who need medical attention, and really creating this smarter system around that. All of this obviously has become enormously useful for COVID-19, which I'll talk about in a minute. These are some of the investments we've made all across the board in some of these areas, and this is again ranging in what's important to note here is that these all range in maturity. So some of these are still university-based teams. Some of these are established startup companies. Some of these are companies that have come from other spaces into this as well. And that's really our mentality. And if you look at this whole, just to take a step back here, if you take a look at some of these technologies that really are going to drive the future of health security, they're really not embedded necessarily within the known entities in biotech and pharma, right? And so in order to access to fund to support a lot of this the ecosystem here, we really need to rethink how we fund and support these, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The second program, Solving Sepsis, again, taking a full spectrum view of how we address this. The areas that we're interested in, that we have been interested in and will continue to be interested in, are really developing smarter diagnostic systems. So can we predict sepsis before symptoms arise? 80% of sepsis cases happen or develop outside of the healthcare setting. And so again, this home care model, can we can we find better ways for patients to know they're about to experience sepsis and to alert healthcare providers that that's the case so that they can seek care before they get into septic shock. All the way to post-hospital discharge. If somebody has had serious infection, has experienced sepsis, they're discharged from the hospital, how do we keep track of them? How do we monitor them in smart ways to avoid poor outcomes? Getting the Beyond Needle, we made 6 awards in this space, 4 of which happened over in the last couple of months. So this is a growing area, really a huge interest of ours. And we're starting with vaccines, really, because that's a really important use case where we can address potentially a lot of the utilization issues around normal vaccines, but also pandemic vaccines, and try to encourage a greater utilization and adoption of them by reducing the barriers. So by obviating things like cold chain issues, access to vaccines, and even allowing potentially self-administration in a lot of cases. We're also thinking beyond this and saying, well, can we better deliver other types of therapeutics? Can we better deliver antibiotics in ways where we can both control dosage but again, allow a greater variety of sites in which to administer some of these things. So this is really the beginning, I think, of a huge effort that's going to transform a lot of the work that we do. Getting into COVID-19. So before I get into this, I will acknowledge that most of BARDA at this point has been supporting Operation Warp Speed, working on developing many of the vaccines, therapeutics, and some of the diagnostics tests, which I will talk about in a minute, the diagnostic piece. A lot of this, as Rich mentioned, is involving companies that are in our region here. And this is obviously a huge effort that's underway at BARDA. At the same time, as we do this, one of the things that we've been looking at DRIVE, and I think this is something that we specifically can add value to, is looking across the whole system and saying, well, what else do we need to address? And what can we address on a rapid time scale? That's going to both help the response, but also mitigate some of the worst outcomes of COVID-19. And one of the things that we looked at was this whole portfolio that we have in active salting sepsis and said, look, both of these are extremely core issues in the way we deal with COVID-19. Sepsis is one of the parts of the progression of severe COVID-19. And ACT enables us to identify people who might have COVID-19 before they might want to or have access to tests. And so we can employ both of these to really help the whole system operate better. And so we did a full pivot towards this and really focused on 3 things: empowering the patient, so being able to self-monitor for infection, like I said, empowering healthcare providers to remotely monitor patients, especially in scenarios, again, where nursing homes and things like that, where they're either understaffed or there's an advantage in being able to remotely monitor to avoid transmission risks of disease, but also to prognosticate outcomes of patients with smarter tools. And then thirdly, which is, I think, a really important piece of this, is helping hospitals triage better. There's, in sort of the worst of times, hospitals are inundated and have a difficult time triaging the patients that are likely to develop severe COVID, but also, sending home those who are not likely to develop severe COVID, and being able to efficiently do this with the scarce resources that they have within the ICU and other resources. And so we're working on a number of tools, for example, this project with Cytovale, to develop a 10-minute blood test that can predict in advance the likely severity of COVID-19. So this is a tool that could be administered in the ER and allow hospitals to make decisions on where to send patients. I'll hit on this and then I'll go back to a couple of COVID-19 things. So another program, and again, thinking about this healthcare paradigm as the theme, BARDA has a heavy focus on developing countermeasures for chemical exposures of various kinds. You know, everything from chlorine gas to opioids to a number of other kind of nerve agents and things like that. And one of the issues with this model is that these are somewhat rare circumstances in which the drugs are needed. But if we have the model of these exist in the stockpile and they're used for emergencies, that might be fine for major events where we can deploy those resources, but it also limits our ability to quickly administer these drugs to patients who need them. And, you know, I think we have to rethink this model of we really need these therapeutics, these countermeasures to be readily available. And so this is a program that we just started with our partners in the chemical threats branch within BARDA, to engage in a whole new effort to identify and repurpose commercially available or other drugs in development that could be used for other indications and therefore available widely at hospitals, but at the same time could be used to treat chemical exposures. And so there's a couple things in here where we're focused on developing some of these products, or at least identifying dual use purposes for some products that exist, but also developing and investing in tools that can help us use computational approaches for drug discovery and things like that. And so I think this again is a beginning of a model that I think can apply to a number of different scenarios to really get at this you know, how do we in aggregate lower or reduce the time, cost, burden of clinical trials, of shortening that time, of being able to test and validate more candidates more efficiently with the resources that are given. And I think this is a model in which we can start thinking about that. This is our normal drive portfolio. What I will say, one is that, and this is our COVID portfolio that we've built up in the last several months. The one thing that's in here that I have not discussed yet is the diagnostics piece. So back in March, when we pivoted everything to COVID, we pivoted some of our work, our funding to diagnostic development. And we partnered with our device and diagnostics team at BARDA to really quickly invest in as many laboratory-based, molecular, antigen, point of care, a variety of tests that we could quickly fund, support, scale, get through FDA, UA, and make available for use. And our competitive advantage, the thing that we relied on, was our speed. And so we quickly set up this portfolio and funded these companies initially. And you'll see the dollar amount here seems low, but what ended up happening is we used the drive rapid funding model and then quickly followed with follow-on funding to get these things commercialized. And so this was a relatively new model that hadn't existed before of taking advantage of the speed that we have to move things forward. And speaking of that, so the way we're underpinned is what we call the EasyBA funding vehicle. And so this is rather unique. We actually borrowed this from DARPA, but applied this and improved this for BARDA purposes. And this was the vehicle that we funded a lot of these diagnostics in. So we can make awards very simply in a matter of days in some cases, with relatively short submissions to a wide variety of companies. And this is really targeted at early stage companies. Companies aren't used to seeking government funding. For any of you who've sought SBIR funding, you know how difficult it can be to follow the annual cycles of funding. And we wanted to break that and say, we want to make this available on a rolling basis and be able to quickly support things, companies and products as needed. The other piece of this that I think is really critical is that we want to make it, we can quickly shift our areas of interest on this, and this is the vehicle that we shifted everything to COVID earlier in the year for. The limit is $750,000 or less, so these are small dollar contracts, but again, we can follow these on with further contracts and quickly validate technologies in this kind of pilot stage, and really opens it up to the kind of companies who just can't survive on annual solicitation cycles in many cases. Another piece of our office that has played a huge role in COVID-19, but a lot of other things that we're doing is what we call the Catalyst Office. So this is an office that's trying to innovate at this intersection of business and science. And there's a few elements of this. So one is we've created this accelerator network where we've supported and funded and created this network of 13 accelerators across the country. You'll see this, it's all over the place, but that we want to continue to grow and build these relationships. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to access startups who probably aren't aware of who we are, but also startups from other spaces who may not even understand the priorities of health security. And we want to be able to make these connections faster, more efficiently, and really just create this more vibrant national network. And so this is one way we've done this. The other thing we recognize is that we want to ensure that companies who come to us for funding are successful. It doesn't help anyone if a company comes to us and they have one deficiency, or they just need support in just getting their business model right, and they just don't have that. And so we want to just ensure that they have the right tools through this accelerator network of building those capabilities so that they're more successful when they seek funding from us and others as well. The other big thing that I'm really excited about, the other thing that I'm really excited about, just extending this model of innovating at the intersection of business and science, is a new effort that we are preparing to launch called BARDA Ventures. So this is rather unique. This is something that we've never done before, and we're really excited about, which is using venture capital models, equity-based financing, and other tools that the venture capital community uses routinely, and using it for health security. And there's a few reasons why we think this is important. So one is that this is a area, health security generally, that's been underinvested in, both on the public and private side. And for a lot of reasons, there's not a commercial viability to some of the technologies, although I think with COVID-19 that's likely to change. But there's also not an efficient way to stack capital from different scenarios. And so what we wanted to do was create this partnership, essentially, where we would partner with a nonprofit venture entity, and really marry public and private funds, leverage public funds, or leverage private funds with public funds, and create this funding model that really there's only one or two examples of this within the federal government that's used before. This is an authority that came from the 21st Century Cures Act several years ago, and we're now just ready to launch. And there's three main things that I think we see as an advantage in this. One is that it allows us to act with speed and flexibility. So making quick, agile decisions on funding is super key during an emergency, as we all have seen over the last several months. And to complement some of the things that we do, we recognize that we really need to have a parallel venture-style system of funding and investing in the priorities that are important for BARDA and for health security aims now and in the future. We also want to ensure that we're fortifying some of the U.S. Influence on health security technology development, which whether it's synthetic biology or a lot of other fields, we want to ensure that we are adequately investing from the U.S. government side on this. And then thirdly, we want to make sure that we're maximizing taxpayer value by having a mechanism to recycle funds from successful ventures, put it back into the fund so it can make additional investments without burdening taxpayer dollars further. So this just creates a nice cycle of an evergreen system where we can keep making investments in the space. And at the same time, having a keen focus on commercial viability. I think one of the things that we're trying to solve is this decoupling of health security and the commercial health sector, and ensuring that the things we invest in can have dual purposes as well. We have another internal process that I'll mention really briefly, especially for those in the region here, we're trying to be more open to innovators from a variety of fields. We've set up the system where we're inviting people to come talk to us about the problems they care about and things that they're working on. We want to hear from it because it helps us identify what problems are important to others and help us think about where we should be looking at. But we also have a system that we're building internally to be really more agile about new problem areas that we want to invest in. We want to stay ahead of the game. We don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive. And so we want to know and be able to quickly prop up a new program area, if it's necessary, like we've done with COVID-19 this year. This is the team. If we had in any normal year, we would have probably had a group retreat. We didn't, obviously. So this is our hypothetical retreat photo from our team. But this is a really wonderful team that I hope you all get to know further over time. If you guys have any questions, my email's here, my Twitter account's here. You can check out our website, drive.hs.gov. The BARDA website, you should also check out medicalcountermeasures.gov as well. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Sandeep, thank you very much. I know we probably could have taken the whole day to go over all of the programs within Drive and everything that you're doing from a standpoint around health security. And it's very impressive to see that, what you're doing is innovating research development, accelerated commercialization, leveraging existing technologies and assets that exist around the United States and around the world, finding ways to marry them to address some of the problems that we have today. I really love your innovation around the funding process with your easy BAA funding process, because I hope all of the other federal agencies will adopt something like that, because I guarantee all of our attendees and listeners would welcome some acceleration in the way we can get some of these federal funds that are critical to the high risk research and development these entrepreneurs are developing in a much more expeditious way. And the other thing is, I like your accelerator network, which develops a national way to provide the support to these emerging entrepreneurs who don't just need the money. They need access to networks, mentors, partners as they're going through this development process. So I think this has been very enlightening for our listeners to hear about these programs. I'd love to bring you back someday and just have a program on the Drive, and we could do it in segments around each of the different elements that you have to appeal to those that would have the greatest interest. And one thing I forgot to do when I was introducing you is that why you're so perfect for this role is that in the Secretary's office at HHS, you helped develop that $35 million private-public partnership called Kidney X. And for people who don't know about that, that's probably one of the things that propelled you into the new role with Drive and over at BARDA based on the success you had there. And one last thing is congratulations on being a Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Academy of Sciences, which is not a small achievement. So we are proud to have you here as our first keynote speaker for the 6th Annual BioHealth Capital Region. We know it won't be the last time we interact with you, and we thank you very much for everything you're doing to help address this COVID-19, the pandemic, and future innovation around health security in America.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.